Boom! Alright, I'm going to show you one of the most important videos that have come out. RFK on Tucker Carlson. They often smear the anti-jabbers as like religious lunatics and stuff. The same thing they do with the anti-stem cell research. They chalk that up to religious loonies. It's not religious loonies. It's big pharma. It's big pharma that covers that stuff up. I don't have to add anything to this because it's just fucking gold. So the Shekelchat thing is here. If you want to contribute, that would be great. I got a lot of kids for Christmas to take care of. Here is Robert Kennedy Jr., who was greeted like a rock star in Milan, by the way. Went to Italy, and they love him. If he wasn't banned on Instagram and everything else, if we had a social media that allowed open discussion and dialogue, the authoritarian leftists would get crushed. But they don't allow it. Inner CIA says for putting that rainbow frog in the intro. Yep, right at a crucial part in a crucial place. Of course, if you're a member, that frog is located elsewhere. But I felt like that it was enough. What she did was fine, and I was like, yeah, that's a little much for YouTube. The calendar's fucking epic, though. The only thing delaying that is the result of the Rittenhouse trial, which is going to go on the calendar. Just waiting for that verdict to come in. Rumors about hung juries and all that, nobody effing knows. Like, the MSNBC's following jurors home, though. They have abetted terrorists. They're the ones that had this fake news story about Jacob Blake being shot in the back and all this crap. He had a knife and attacked police and he got shot. Fuck that guy. Okay? Had nothing to do with race. Had to do with an idiot attacking police with a knife. And he is a fucking idiot. Look at his life. And that's not defending the police or anything either. So look, if you attack somebody with a knife who has a gun, they're going to use their gun. Duh. And he's breaking the law and he's kidnapping his child and whatever. They made this fake story, and then the chimp out from a bunch of felons, it seems like, went out and set everybody's stuff on fire. They should have been arrested for that. It is unbelievable that that part of it, Kyle gets indicted, but all these assholes on film burning the town, setting tractor trailers on fire, setting stores on fire, and breaking car windows, just burned down a car lot, tried to burn down the gas station. Not one arrest. There have been more arrests of the rioting, protesting outside the courthouse, trying to intimidate the jurors. A couple people got arrested. One of them looked like an FBI COINTELPRO with a "Fuck Kyle" shirt. That guy glowed in the dark from a mile away, in my opinion. But they're trying to instigate shit with BLM. And it was the Black Lives Matter people. They're like, hey, settle down, shut up, this ain't the way, right? And it was some white boy trying to instigate violence on their behalf, right? Fed. That's a Fed. He gets arrested. I'm sure they released him the next day. You know, like, oh, your shit didn't work. We got to move you to another location, bring in a new agent. S. Snyder says, so day after we get Jump Kick Man's ID, Mr. Andy Nose shared Groski's threatening folks online. Here we go. Yeah. The motherfucker that got his arm blown off is already making threats online. Fuck around and find out part 2 Portland coming to theaters soon. You know Portland has more people than Seattle, or less people than Seattle, but more shootings? Shootings are up like 80%. Whitest city in America. RN Jim Zeus says, Rosen Gone is the best kind of pedophile. Gone. Yeah, I know. Man, I'll tell you what. They defend these pedophiles and whoremongers like Hunter Biden, who's both, and Joe Biden having showers with his daughter, and she writes about it in her diary, and then they raid the journalist's house. They have more empathy for pedophiles and arsonist thugs than they do the victims of those people. And the Pentagon, too, exonerated. Remember when I said, look, they actually had culpability in Afghanistan, admitted what they did is wrong. Oh no, they already 180'd on that. They said, oh no, we investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing. Well, there had to be wrongdoing. You killed 10 children and a truck that was carrying water bottles. Somebody effed up. Was it the intel? Was it the drone following the truck around for 2 hours? You don't care. You're like, how much does it cost to fire these munitions? And then we get to replace them? Cha-ching! And so they just do it. Just like Big Pharma. We granted ourselves immunity from lawsuits, and we're just going to put stuff in people. And we don't need a 5-year trial. We don't need a double blind. We don't need placebo. We just see what happens. And now children are getting blood clots and heart inflammation, all this crazy stuff from the boosters. And do you know what they're saying? Rather than blaming the jab, oh no, that's climate change. The weather changed, so children are getting blood clots out of the blue. We don't know why. Moderna and little demon Fauci are like this. By the way, the mayor of Nara, the same guy that rides a horse with deer following him around, he like throws, it's a deer cookies. He throws these crumbs out and the deer follow him around as he trots around on his horse in traditional like samurai Japanese gear. The guy's base of based. He called Dr. Fauci a little demon man. He took the COVID money. He said, we're going to spend this on childcare. Something useful. Quit panicking. Unfortunately, he's only the mayor, not the governor. But if you're in Japan and you come to Nara City, spend your money. They deserve it. He's an independent too. He got elected as an independent. I may have had some influence on that city, considering I am the goodwill ambassador for it, and I've been going to every fucking meeting same way I used to do in North Carolina, except they don't allow cameras in these. And giving my 2 cents. Team K 2020. Great job, Ryan. Well, thank you. I got to get to this RFK video, but I don't mind the Shekelchats either. Or the Rittenhouse updates. Ernie Truth gives a high five. Dead Lincoln says, you've been on fire recently with the commentary. We appreciate you much, my brother. Yeah, I just wish I could leave the videos up on YouTube, but I can't because, Wokery says delete anything you say because they got a bunch of NPCs probably in Bangladesh, that police Twitter and YouTube. So they don't know English nuance, and nor do they care. They just, look, all this information about Rosenbaum being a pedophile and the other two being felons and choking women and breaking and entering and pulling a knife on their grandmother and all that crap. We had that out the night it happened. I went and got their jail records and all that and put it out. I put it on Twitter because I had one back then. I said it on YouTube, made jokes about it all year long. They erased it. And I'm glad it's coming out, but a lot of the stuff they're discovering on Fox News just now has been out and would have been out for a really long time. And the fact that, like, Anna Nosejob, the House Armenian, and Jimmy Communist Door are admitting that they were wrong, that they were lied to about Kyle. It's like, hey, dickweed, you would have known that a long time ago if the censorship online wasn't so bad. You're just now seeing that Rosenhaus chased them across 3 parking lots in the video in the fucking trial. You mean you never came across that in your social media ever? No one said, hey, that ain't true, look at this? That's amazing level of ignorance. Like, what little bubble have you insulated yourself into for you not to fucking know the basic facts? And this isn't just like somebody. These are people that comment on this stuff. Jimmy's a comedian, but Anna should have known that right away. The first time you say your dumb shit like he crossed state lines with a gun. No, he didn't. He crossed state lines, which is not illegal, because his dad lived there and he worked there. He got the gun in Wisconsin. He did not cross the line with the gun, and even if he did, so what? It's not against the law. And a 17-year-old is allowed to have a gun by the law of that state in Wisconsin. He did not bring it to Illinois. You still hear these stupid asses say, he crossed state lines with a firearm and assault rifle. Some of them say it's fully automatic. That is not what the A in AR-15 means. It's just like you. I mean, I need a button to push because I know the stupid shit they're gonna say because it's not even their own words. It comes straight from MSNBC, Microsoft NBC. You know, the Bill Gates channel. We're gonna go, dude. That guy's going down when Maxwell goes to trial. I need a little button to push. It'd be like, he did not cross state lines with a gun. He got the gun in Wisconsin. It is not illegal to have. They dropped the gun charges because it's not illegal to have a long barrel rifle in this state, even at 17. It isn't. He was not chasing Rosenbaum around. Rosenbaum was chasing him, saying, I'm going to kill you if I find you alone, motherfucker. You won't do shit, MFer. Whirling around a chain, setting shit on fire. Fuck all these felons. Where's the January 6th style raid on these people? There won't be, because they're on the left. The far, far fucking left. You got a combo of financing from Soros and their Chinese buddies. Jay Snyder. Oh, wait. I missed. Nope. Okay. Jay Snyder for 3. Speaking of F. Kyle dudes starting shit, he's actually a Daglon fan. The woman, Emily Cahill, is actually a multiple meth tracker who just got with the GOP Black the Blue events. She glows hard as fuck. Yeah, anybody dealing meth is either a legit leftist drug addict or an FBI goon. And the ones that go across the actual border would be CIA. Why is it taking the jury so long to deliberate? Somebody wrote in caps, which I hate, but because this trial isn't just about did he defend himself. He definitely did. They are afraid that if they don't decide the way the left wants, that they will get attacked and that their town will burn down. And MSNBC followed a juror to their house. That's jury intimidation. This whole thing should be a mistrial with prejudice. And MSNBC should face consequences for that. Why the fuck are you following around jurors? That's some mafia stuff. That's a mob tactic. That's what Alessio and his goons did to the Sirhan's judge. In the RFK shooting. Yeah, don't write in all caps, because if you do, then everyone else does, and it just, what's the point? It just looks spastic, too. Are you 12? You know what I mean? If you want attention, make a Shekelchat. I read all of them. I only read that one because it like 50 other people had asked the same thing. They violated Kyle's right. The President of the United States just flippantly called him a white supremacist. That's defamation. Where's the ADL? Oh, wait. They should drop the A. It's a defamation league. That's what the ADL is. And they've been, hey, they were defending pedophiles before it was cool. Right? From their inception. With Leo Frank. They defended a child murdering and child rapist. He had little girls working in his pencil factory who he was raping. And he strangled one to death and hit her head, Mary Fagan. He murdered her. He was the president of the B'nai B'rith chapter in Georgia, so that the ADL was formed to come to his defense. Because it made all of them look bad. Because they think in collectivist terms. And they assume everyone else is the same way. RM Jimzu says, thanks to everything you do, man. Telegram has been lit. RFK Jr. made my day. My based waifu just brought in eggs and sausage and a steak. This is love right here. She's just watching the baby and cooking in the kitchen. She's wearing an apron and vinyl pants. Yeah. I can't wait for the baby to take a nap. Yeah, poor Mary Fagan. The good thing is, in that one, they had a jail break-in. Because the ADL and B'nai B'rith bribed the governor to commute the sentence. So they broke into jail. They grabbed his little bell-ringing ass. brought him out on a 29-mile-an-hour car chase, because it's the 19 teens. That's about as fast as they could go. Strung him up in the woods and hanged his ass, Southern Justice style. Also, he tried to frame 2 different black guys, but nobody believed him. And the entire jury was like, you did it. Because the whole town had known all the other girls he'd been raping. The evidence was overwhelming. Including the other, and there were Jews on the jury. They also convicted him. Because it's not a race thing. It's an individual, Leon Frank is an asshole thing. But for the collectivists, they're like, oh, we can't let one of our own go to prison. Blah, 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 blah. Which does the opposite of what they want. It makes it look worse. Poseidon for 10 just says America. Yeah, exactly. Japan is not even aware of this case. Somebody asked. They don't. It's not a thing here. Japan doesn't cover news that doesn't interfere with Japan. They're very much, don't rock the boat. Stay out of other people's business. That's how they roll. Unless it's China. Nakagawa called Dr. Fauci a little demon man. It's awesome. Okay, let's get to RFK, shall we? Bam. And by the way, this is on PeerTube.
Not used to the way his voice sounds, you can think to yourself, well, I'm having trouble understanding this. Our strong advice to you is to keep listening. It is worth it. There's a lot in here, and you should hear all of it. Welcome to Tucker Carlson Today. Our next guest, Robert Kennedy Jr., doesn't need much of an introduction. He's been familiar to most Americans for a very long time. I would just add 2 things. One, he is one of the bravest, most impressive people I personally have ever met. And 2, he is a remarkable journalist. 20 years ago, when his first cousin, Michael Shekelchats, was convicted of murder and sentenced to 20 years to life, Bobby Kennedy Jr. wrote maybe one of the great magazine pieces of all time, 2003, in The Atlantic, convincing many skeptics, including the one now speaking, that actually this was a miscarriage of justice, effectively proving his cousin's innocence in that case against a surging tide of media opposition. That rarely happens in journalism. And it suggested a kind of rigor of thinking and intensity and commitment to the facts that he has brought to his latest book. And that's the subject of today's interview. The book is called The Real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. We are honored to have Bobby Kennedy Jr. in the studio with us today. Bobby, thanks so much for coming on.
Tucker, thanks so much for having me.
So, I mean, this is the question I think everyone asks when they first read about you. You know, why would you do something like this? You're well known. You could spend the rest of your life just, I don't know, being feted by famous people. There's absolutely no reason to stick your finger in the eye of the people who run the country by writing a book like this, but you did it anyway. Why?
Well, I think, what's happened in this country over the last year, this bizarre imposition of totalitarian controls, the deconstruction of the Constitution, the rise of censorship, the rise of the suppression of kind of religious freedoms, of property rights, closing 1 million businesses without just compensation or due process, the abolition of jury trials, which are guaranteed by the 6th and 7th Amendment for any vaccine company that hurts you. All of these, and the rise of kind of track and trace surveillance state has been troubling to people, both Democrats and Republicans, people who support vaccines, people who oppose them, are looking at this and wondering what's happened. And I felt like I was in a unique position to interpret and to explain to people what had happened. I've been working, as an environmental lawyer for 40 years, so I understand all of these mechanisms of corporate capture by which regulatory agencies assert control over regulated industries assert control over the agencies that are supposed to regulate them and essentially turn them into sock puppets. And I've been working on vaccine issues since 2005. And the kind of regulatory capture that you see in that space is really capture on steroids, because these agencies FDA gets 45% of its budget from vaccine companies, from industry.
Wait, may I pause? The FDA gets 45% of its budget from vaccine companies?
Pharmaceutical companies. And it's like, it's as if EPA got half of its budget from the coal companies. If you can imagine what I spent probably 20% of the lawsuits, of the hundreds of lawsuits that I bought as an environmental lawyer were against EPA for sweetheart, arrangements for giving permits to oil companies, et cetera, that were illegal. And if you can imagine how much worse that capture would be if half of EPA's budget came from oil and coal companies. That's what you're dealing with in the pharmaceutical space. Not only that, CDC, which is another one of the HHS sub-agencies, spends $4.9 billion annually of its $12 billion budget buying and distributing vaccines. So it's really a vaccine company. It's not a regulatory agency. That's about 40% of its budget. CDC has vaccine patents. So the vaccines that it's pushing, it has 57 vaccine patents, is making royalties on. NIH has thousands of patents, many of them for vaccines. For example, Tony Fauci's agency owns half the Moderna patent and stands to make billions and billions of dollars on sales of the Moderna vaccine. 4 of Tony Fauci's top aides also have patent rights to Moderna. So Tony Fauci can assign patent rights to his favored, loyalists within his agency, and they then get to keep $150,000 a year for the rest of their lives on a product they're supposed to be regulating. Tony Fauci owns patents on drugs that he has developed. And so it's, the regulatory function has been essentially subsumed by the commercial and mercantile aspects of vaccine production and vaccine manufacturing and vaccine uptake. And if you, within HHS, the way that you get promotions and raises and, salary bonuses, et cetera, is by contributing to the crusade for vaccine uptake. You do not get promoted for finding problems with vaccines. And that's actually what we as a taxpayer are paying these regulators to do, but they're not doing it. And so I had kind of a unique perspective on what was happening at the beginning of 2020 and, was able to kind of predict how they were going to handle this, how they would suppress. I've watched Tony Fauci. I've known Tony Fauci for years.
I got to add something. RFK Jr. has a throat disorder. That's why it sounds like this. Tucker already said this. I'm saying it again, okay? Who cares? All right? His voice is scratchy. It's always like that. It's beyond his control. Focus on what he's saying, not what it sounds like. Jesus, people, you got to get over your presentation bias and prejudices. Not everything's a slick $1 million Hollywood film, okay? Not everybody can present things the way you're used to on Netflix all the time. These are real people. He has a throat disorder. That's what he sounds like. Get over yourself, you fucking snobby pricks.
Oh, Fauci personally.
Yeah, I've met Fauci personally, but my family has these deep entanglements with these health agencies. My uncles literally wrote the legislation that created a lot of these agencies. My Uncle Teddy, for 50 years, was the chair of the health committee, so he was writing the budgets for, Tony Fauci and Francis Collins and all these agencies for years. Some of the key institutions within NIH and HHS are named for members of my family, Shriver, my grandmother, Rose Kennedy, and, we've had these deep entanglements. So I know Tony Fauci, but I also am very conscious of the fact that these officials really do not do public health so much as pharmaceutical production. Tony Fauci has transformed NIH into an incubator for pharmaceutical products. So he's supposed to be doing what Congress intended him to do, is to try to track the etiology of allergic diseases and chronic diseases and infectious diseases, and then figure out, do the kind of science we need to stop those diseases. There's been, since he came in 1968, we've gone from about 6% of Americans having chronic disease to, by 2006, 54%. What do I mean by what? What do I mean by chronic disease? There's three major categories, and then obesity. But one is neurodevelopmental diseases: ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette's syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, and autism. If you're my age, I'm 67 years old. I never heard of any of those diseases when I was a kid, and I didn't know anybody. I've been around. I was at the spear tip of working with people with intellectual disabilities. My family started Special Olympics. I never saw an autistic kid prior to 1989. I still don't know a single person my age who has full-blown autism. And by that, I mean nonverbal, non-toilet trained, head banging, stimming, toe walking. In my generation, it's about 1 in 10,000 who have autism. In my kids' generation, according to the CDC, it's 1 in every 34, 1 in every 22 boys. Tony Fauci's job is to figure out why that happened. And when Congress said to EPA...
Those are amazing statistics.
When Congress said to EPA, tell us what year the autism epidemic began, EPA scientists came back and said 1989. So, but 1989 was also, they said there's a red line that year. And 1989, a lot of other stuff started, like food allergies. I had 11 siblings and about 70 first cousins. I didn't know anybody with a food allergy. Peanut allergy? Why do 5 of my kids have food allergies? Eczema. The allergic, you have the neurodevelopmental disease, you have the allergic disease like asthma, eczema, anaphylaxis, food allergies, peanut allergies, all the food allergies exploded beginning in 1989. And then the last category is autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile diabetes. I didn't know anybody with diabetes when I was a kid. Today, there's diabetic kids in every classroom. There's about 70 autoimmune diseases that have become, at some level, epidemics since 1989. Tony Fauci's job is to tell us where they're coming from. We know it has to be an environmental toxin because genes do not cause epidemics. They may provide a vulnerability, but you need an environmental toxin. And there's a limited number of them. There's a guy called Phil Landrigan, who's a very famous toxicologist in New York, and he looked at this cascade of chronic disease that began, in the beginning of the 1990s, and he looked at the timing for exposures to certain environmental toxins, and he came out with about 11 of them, and he said, essentially it has to be one of these because they're the only ones that became ubiquitous across all populations. You had the same impact on Cuban children in Key Biscayne, Miami, and Inuit kids in Homer, Alaska, all at the same time. What could that be? It could be glyphosate, which is, the product in Roundup, which became ubiquitous around that time. It could be neonicotinoid pesticides. It could be PFOAs, which is a flame retardant, which also became ubiquitous. It could be cell phones. It could be Wi-Fi. It could be ultrasound. He comes out with about 11 of those. But one of the key suspects has to be vaccines because the vaccine schedule, we went from having 3 vaccines I took when I was a kid, when I was fully compliant, to the 72 doses of 16 vaccines that our kids now are mandated to take if they want to stay in the school. And that really began in 1986 when they passed the Vaccine Act and gave complete shield from liability to all vaccine companies, so that if you're a vaccine company and you injure somebody, no matter how grievous the injury, no matter how reckless your conduct, no matter how negligent you were, no matter how toxic the ingredient, nobody can sue you. So there's no depositions, there's no discovery, there's no class actions, and there's no incentive for you to make that product safe.
May I ask, is there any other manufacturer, distributors, or any other product that has that kind of liability protection?
There is liability protection. There's a cap with nuclear power plants. And that's called the Price-Anderson Act. At Congress, the insurance company wouldn't insure them, which was the problem with the vaccines. It wasn't a bunch of hippies who looked at the vaccines and said they're dangerous. It was the insurance companies who said, you are too dangerous for us to insure. And Pfizer, what happened is, Pfizer, which was then called Wyeth, had a product in the early 80s when they started ramping up vaccines, and it was a diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccine, a DTP vaccine. They knew that there was an injury rate because people started reporting injuries. But CDC was telling the world it was 1 in a million serious injuries. Their internal documents show that they believed it was 1 in 15,000 who got permanent brain injury or death. But then NIH and Wyeth and UCLA funded a study at UCLA where they really did a controlled study, and they immediately found it was 1 in every 300 kids. The result of that, Wyeth at that time was saying, we are paying $20 in downstream liability for every dollar we're making a profit. They went to the Reagan administration and to the Democrats in Congress. This was, everybody was at fault here, and they said, if you don't give us blanket freedom from liability, we are going to stop making vaccines, and you will be out of a vaccine supply. So Congress passed and Reagan signed. Everybody was reluctant to do it. And Reagan actually said to the companies, why don't you just make the vaccine safe? And good question. And Wyeth said, because vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. And that phrase, unavoidably unsafe, is in the preamble to the Vaccine Act. And it is also part of the Supreme Court case in Berkowitz that essentially codified, that gave legal sanction, Brucewitz, that gave legal sanction to, to the freedom from liability. So once that happened, there was a gold rush because the vaccine companies said, holy cow, now we've got a product that is free from the biggest cost for every other every medicine kills somebody. There's vulnerable subgroups. So, and it is, for most medicines, it's their biggest cost, paying those liabilities. So now the company said, holy cow, now we're completely free from that cost. They also, vaccines are the only company, the only product that never has to be safety tested. And the reason for that, it's an artifact of the CDC's legacy as the Public Health Service, which was a quasi-military agency. That's why people at the CDC have military ranks like Surgeon General, and they wear uniforms. And because it always had, the health agencies are very closely aligned with the military. And the vaccine program was conceived as a national security defense against biological attacks on our country. So they wanted to make sure that if the Russians attacked us with anthrax or some other biological agent, we could quickly formulate a vaccine, distribute it to 200 million American civilians with no regulatory impediments. And so they said, if we call this a medicine, we're going to have to test it like you test medicines, which is usually a 5-year placebo-controlled, randomized, double-blind study. And you do it for 5 years because many medicine injuries have long incubation periods or long diagnostic horizons. So you need that long period of time to really make a cost-benefit analysis. Over the long term, you're saving lives. They said, we can't afford to do that. So their solution was, we won't call it a medicine. We'll call it a biologic, and we'll exempt biologics from safety testing. Now, none of the 72 vaccines that is currently mandated for our children has ever been safety tested against a placebo in preclinical trials. I made that statement for many years, and Tony Fauci said that I was wrong. I met with Tony Fauci in 2016 and Francis Collins with somebody from the Trump White House present. And I was with Del Bigtree and Aaron Siri and Lynn Redwood, who's a nurse practitioner. And I made that, I reiterated that statement to them. There's never been a single preclinical trial of randomized controlled placebo testing for any of the 72 vaccines. They said in front of the White House Observer, you're wrong. And I said to them, and show me one. I knew they didn't exist unless they had them locked in a safe, because I had asked for them on Freedom of Information requests and they hadn't been able to produce them. Oh, they just said, we're wrong, we'll get them to you. And they never did. It's the last I heard from them. So we sued them, Del and Aaron and me, for ICANN. We sued them, and after a year, in 2017, after a year of litigation, HHS came back and said, you're right, we've never done any. So nobody knows the risk profile for any of those vaccines. So nobody can tell you with a scientific certainty whether any of those products are causing more deaths and injuries than they're averting. People say I'm anti-vaccine. I'm not. I'm pro-science and pro-safety testing. If there's a vaccine that is shown to work in a preclinical or in a randomized placebo-controlled trial, I 100% would support it. And by work, I mean that after 5 years, the vaccinated cohort is healthier than the unvaccinated cohort. That's really what we need to know.
So can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question? So that you are effectively defending science, the scientific method, the free inquiry that's the basis of science. I couldn't agree with you more. At the beginning of this whole thing, I asked the obvious question about the VAERS numbers. Like, every medicine kills somebody. That is demonstrably true. Advil kills people. So, like, what's the harm, demonstrated harm of this vaccine? Nobody wants to ask that question. Nobody wants to hear it posed. People become hysterical on both sides if you ask that question. You've been borne the brunt of that hysteria for years. What is that about? What's the psychology that leads people to say, I don't want to know about the downside?
Well, let me talk, because you mentioned the VAERS number. The VAERS is a vaccine adverse event reporting system.
Yes.
What the HHS rationale is that, yes, we didn't do adequate safety trials. They're abbreviated, and they're abbreviated. They're too short to actually do safety trials. But if there are, and they were stratified, and there weren't certain age groups, so you don't know what the risk factor is, really know what the risk factor is for older people. It turns out if you're over 70, your risk from COVID are 1,000 times greater than if you're under 70. So, yes. And that's really important when you craft public health policy, to have that kind of information, yes. Right? Because your strategy for children should be completely different than your strategy from adults. They didn't have that kind of stratification in that study where you could look at each of those cohorts and make those kind of calculations. What HHS and the Public Health Agency said is, we will figure that out post-licensing if we will start giving these vaccines to millions of people, and we will then see if people are harmed. The problem is the system, the surveillance system that they have, which is the only one that that they've had for years, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. Now, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which we'll call VAERS, has collected a humongous number of injuries. It's a voluntary system, so the doctor or somebody injured has to call in, and it takes about 30 minutes to make up the, to go through the process, and there's no real penalty if you skip it. So a lot of doctors don't recognize vaccine injury. They have an incentive not to report it because they just gave your kid the shot and they said it's going to save his life. And if instead he's in a wheelchair, crippled, they don't really want to acknowledge it was the vaccine. They just say that happened. So that happened. That kind of non-reporting is epidemic. So but nevertheless, there have been 17,000 deaths reported to VAERS from the COVID vaccines. And that's more deaths in the last 8 months than all of the deaths from all vaccines, the billions and billions of vaccines combined over the past 30 years. So this vaccine appears to be killing more people than all vaccines combined. There's more reports of deaths following vaccination. Here's the problem, is that the VAERS system doesn't work. It is designed, in fact, to fail. It's designed to undercount injuries by as much as 99%. Why do I say that? Because HHS did a study on the system in 2010. People can look it up. It's called Lazarus et al. And they published it. And they spent millions of dollars on this study, and they looked at one HMO. And what they did is they designed a machine counting system. How does a machine counting system work? Well, you take the HMO, has all the deaths, has all the records of all the medical claims of all their patients, and they have the vaccine records down to batch number. So every vaccine that patient took, they know. So it's quite easy to use AI to do a cluster analysis and compare whether people who got this batch of this vaccine are getting more diabetes or autism or ADD or rheumatoid arthritis or autoimmune disease or whatever. You can do it in an instant. So they designed a system like that, and they used it on the Harvard Pilgrim HMO in Boston. And then they compared it to what VAERS was getting. And what they found was that the vaccine injuries were actually very, very common. They were happening in about 1 out of every 40 people per vaccine. And that VAERS was missing more than 99%. So the conclusion of that study is fewer than 1% of vaccine injuries are reported. Now, the interesting thing is they have that machine counting system, and they were going to roll it out to all the other HMOs. But when CDC saw the results, the frightening, alarming results, they killed that study. And they refused to answer the phone calls of Lazarus and his team. And Lazarus and his team were, they were people from Harvard, and they were members of another health agency that is also within HHS. So CDC stopped talking to its fellow agency because it didn't like the news they were trying to give. It's called the Agency for Health Research Quality, the AHRQ. And how do I know this? Because if you look up the Lazarus study, the last lines in it say, CDC, when we showed them the results, they were very proud that they had done this. And CDC showed them, when they showed the results to CDC, they said the CDC officials in charge of this project refused to answer our phone calls afterwards. So they just shut them down because they saw something that they did not want the public to know about vaccine safety.
It's horrifying. So in the book, and even in the title of the book, you make the connection between Tony Fauci and Bill Gates. So for our viewers who are not familiar with that connection, can you give us a sense of what it is and why it matters?
In 2000, Tony Fauci flew out to Seattle, Washington, and he had this meeting, this very strange meeting in Bill Gates' $85 million mansion on the banks of Lake Washington. And Gates brought him into his library, and he said, I want to propose a partnership with you. And the partnership was to try to vaccinate all of humanity. And they ended up calling that, in 2009, they rechristened the program the Decade of Vaccines. Gates went to the UN and gave this speech in which he promised to vaccinate essentially all of humanity with a multiple battery of vaccines by 2020. And he began using his philanthropy to create a series of other quasi-governmental agencies, CEPI, Gavi, and a number of others, and then to gain control of the WHO. And what he calls what he does philanthrocapitalism. It's not about philanthropy. It's about enriching the capitalists. What he does is he buys, and he does this in a number of areas I show in the book. He does it with food. He did it with the core curriculum. He buys large stakes in companies that could benefit from a change in governmental policies, a worldwide change in governmental policy. So he owns stakes, very, very large stakes, in almost all the big pharmaceutical companies. And he gives essentially about $1 billion to WHO every year, but through Rotary International, through Gavi, through CEPI, and through the Gates Foundation. But they're sort of, the cumulative is even larger than the US, which is the second biggest. That gives him control over WHO's policy. So the analysis of WHO say there's nothing that goes through WHO that is not vetted first by the Gates Foundation. And WHO controls the HIV money, and it funds the health agencies at most African countries. So they're completely reliant on those annual checks from WHO. And what Gates and WHO do, or WHO at Gates' behest, because a lot of people in WHO do not want to do this, he's taken them away from their traditional occupations, which was economic development, hygiene, food supply, food production, and local democracy and local control. So WHO does very little of those things now, and they really focus, over 50% of their budget focus on one of Gates' vaccine, one only, the polio vaccine, which is a flawed vaccine. The polio vaccine, according to WHO's own number, causes 70% of the polio on Earth every year. So it's not a successful vaccine, but what he does then is he through WHO will go in and say to the African country, if you want your annual check from us, here's what you've got to do. You have to show an 80% uptake of the DTP vaccine. The DTP vaccine we don't use in white countries. The United States, that's the vaccine that was killing one out of every 300 kids. We got rid of it. The Europeans got rid of it. But Gates gives 161 million African children that vaccine every year. And what he'll say is, the WHO will say to this country, you don't get your HIV money, you don't get your systems money to run your health agency unless you can show us that you've vaccinated 80% of your kids. And that's a hypothetical number, but it will be something like that with the DTP vaccine. Then they get so those countries then are forced to buy that vaccine, and that vaccine, they have to purchase it ultimately from one of the companies that Gates is heavily invested in. And Gates is so what he has a $33 billion corpus that he's put in the Gates Foundation, but it's still his money. He's still controlling it. And it's now tax deductible. It's shielded from taxes, and he is now deploying it to change government policies in a way that enriches companies that he's elsewhere invested in. And he does the same thing with food. He switched millions and millions of Africans from subsistence farming that they've been doing successfully for 10,000 generations to GMO crops, to heavily, lots of inputs, chemical agriculture, carbon-based fertilizers that all have to be imported by his companies. He has huge investments in Monsanto, in Cargill, and then in the processed food companies that are then buying those commodities cheap, like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and Kraft cheese, those kind of things. So the more you look at it, though, the more corrupt it gets. But his deal with Tony Fauci, which I go into in detail, what the result, the outcome for that bargain on the lives and health of millions and millions of Africans and South Asians has been absolutely catastrophic.
Why do you, not to get to motive, this is an exhaustively reported book that I can't recommend strongly enough. But I have to ask, what do you think motivates, apart from the profit motive that you just explained? It does seem to be an ideological fervor behind these vaccination campaigns. Like, it seems there's a religious quality to it. Am I imagining that?
Religious quality to it, right? To the orthodoxy. What motivates it's pretty simple, which is power, which is motivated. Bad behavior and good behavior for, since the human beings left Eden, right? In fact, that's why we got kicked out of Eden. I noticed. Right? So that's, it's not a mystery that people want to accumulate power. Bill Gates is not interested in money in terms of currency. He's not sitting there, making big piles of bills. People accumulate money so that they can have power over their lives, over their environment, over their health, their food, but ultimately over other people. And some, if you're a sociopath or even people who are very, very well motivated, want to have power because they believe that they have a unique opportunity or unique ability to improve people's lives. So whatever, and one thing I don't do, there's 2,200 footnotes in that book. Everything is cited and sourced. And what I do is I show conduct. I do not try to look into people's heads.
I noticed that. No, I noticed that. But
you were asking about the orthodoxy, and you and I actually talked about this at another time. That orthodoxy is why do people have this religious fervor when it comes to vaccine? Why can't I sit down with my friends, my liberal friends, and have a fact-based conversation? Why do I have to be silenced? Why do people consider me dangerous? So that you're taking a huge risk by putting me on this show. Why can't we do what you're supposed to do in a democracy, which is to have, ultimately to find common ground with people who disagree with you, to love your enemy, to have fact-based debates, and that are congenial and that are, and that maybe can resolve and maybe not resolve issues. And instead, anybody who tries to talk about these things runs into something that looks like an old-style medieval religious orthodoxy, which is, the repetition of these shibboleths: follow the science, protect granny, stop being selfish, and but a total unwillingness to talk about facts, an imperviousness to factual argument, and not only that, but just a ferocious anger that you are dangerous because you have a different point of view than I do, and that kind of orthodoxy has occurred throughout time. We are kind of designed to embrace orthodoxy. We're hardwired for orthodoxy from the 20,000 generations. Our race spent wandering the African savannah in tiny groups, following a powerful leader at war with all of our neighbors, and having to embrace as a unit cohesion through a uniform cosmology, and anybody on the out-group was evil and dangerous, and anybody on the in-group, no matter how badly behaved they were, they had to be defended. And it's tribalism writ large, and that's what we're looking at. We're looking at this polarization and tribalism, and I believe a lot of that is strategic. And what I try to do is completely divorce myself from the politics and talk to Republicans and Democrats, because I think what we're seeing now is this imposition of these controls that have benefited these elites. You know, there's 500 new billionaires. Since the lockdown started, there's been a shift of $3.8 trillion in wealth from working people globally to, you know, this top rung of billionaires, most of them Silicon Valley people, or, you know, from this communications grid, you know, who are, by the way, tied to the intelligence agencies through a variety of you know, different entanglements. But, you know, it's Gates, it's Larry Ellison, it's Sergey Brin from Google, it's Mark Zuckerberg, it's Bloomberg, the mainstream, and social media. And the weird thing that people don't seem to see is that the people these people who are cashing in with hundreds of billions from the lockdowns are the same people who are censoring criticism of the lockdowns. And you know,
kind of a closed loop there, isn't it?
It's a closed loop, and the best thing for them is if the Republicans and Democrats are fighting with each other, and blacks and whites are fighting, right, and the polarization and the anger and the, you know, the bitterness at the ground level is occurring, and nobody is noticing that they are feeding on the corpses of our obliterated middle class and gorging themselves.
I'm pulling back from pounding my fist on the table in agreement. I guess the upside of this sad moment is people's minds have gotten open to the point where they can hear what you're saying, which I think is absolutely provably true. So in the book, you use the phrase coup d'etat against liberal democracy repeatedly, worked me into a frenzy as I was reading it. Explain, if you would, what you meant by that.
Well, you know, and I mentioned this a little earlier, we've really seen the systematic demolition of our Bill of Rights, okay? And, you know, it's literally like it's systematic. And James Madison, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson all said, we put freedom of speech in the First Amendment because if a government can, you know, if they can get rid of that one, then they have a license to commit any kind of atrocity they want. If you can't criticize them, they're going to destroy you. They're going to expand their power till there's nothing left for you. Freedom of speech, you know, I mean, nobody ever has been able to point to a single misstatement I ever made on Instagram. You know, everything, we put a huge amount at Children's Health Defense, huge amounts of resources into fact-checking, more than any, as far as I can tell, any other, now, you know, any other publication. We have on our board a Nobel Prize winner who discovered the HIV virus in 1993, the former head of the National Toxicity Program, on our scientific advisory board, 312 PhD scientists and MDs, and they look at what we're doing, and we fact check it rigorously. We have an entire team that does that. Everything I ever put on Instagram was sourced to a government database or to a peer-reviewed publication, but I got thrown off for vaccine misinformation because that term does not have anything to do with whether it's factually correct or not. It's simply a euphemism or anything that departs from government proclamations and, you know, corporate profit taking. If you threaten those things, then you are passing on misinformation. So anybody who wanted to criticize the government, they got rid of. That's why we had the revolution, so that we could criticize the government. Yes. And we put that first, and yet it's gone. Then the next thing they go after, the other half of the First Amendment, freedom of religion. They close every church in this country for a year. And they keep the liquor stores open, well, by the way, without any hearing, without showing any science, without notice and comment rulemaking, no discussion, no debate. They keep the liquor stores open as essential businesses. Now, I have no problem with that, but with keeping the liquor stores open. But the liquor stores are not in the Constitution. The churches are. And, we shouldn't be able to close those lightly without having a debate about it. Then they go after property rights. They close 1 million businesses without due process or just compensation. That's a violation of the Constitution. They get rid of jury trials, the Sixth and Seventh Amendment. Here's what the Seventh Amendment says. No American shall be deprived of their rights to a trial before a jury of their peers in cases or controversies exceeding $25. That's it. It's the whole amendment. So there's no pandemic exception. And yet, anybody now who claims to be doing a countermeasure, it's not just the vaccine makers who you can't get a jury trial against if they kill you, but if you go into a hospital and you slip on a slippery floor that somebody negligently, put bacon grease on, you can't sue for that. So, anybody who's involved in this project, you can't. Jury trials have been abolished. They've gotten rid of the prohibitions against warrantless searches and seizures, and we're now all part of this, track and trace surveillance state, and on and on. They literally have gotten rid of every amendment except they've gotten due process. Due process law. Here's what due process says. If you want to pass a law in this country, if Congress passes it, okay. We vote for Congress. We don't like it. We can vote them out. But if an agency passes it, they have to do certain things to make sure there's democracy involved. They have to put a notice of the rulemaking. They've published the proposed rule. They have to publish an environmental impact statement explaining all the science behind the proposed rule, citing the studies, citing their rationale, an economic impact statement showing how each person in society will get hurt, and a regulatory impact statement to make sure the costs meet the benefits. And they have to have notice and comment. So we get 30 or 60 or 90 days where everybody sends in letters and says, this is going to, for example, a guy could say, I own a kayak company. I can't put masks on my clients because it could kill them if they fall over. So I should be exempted. So those are the kind of things you do with notice and comment, and the government has to respond. You have to narrowly tailor the rules so it only does what it's intended to do and doesn't affect other people. And then you have a public hearing where Tony Fauci could bring in his experts to say why masks work, why lockdowns work, why social distancing works. And other people who oppose him can bring in theirs. And you have a case that's published and everybody watches it, and then there's an appeal. None of that happened. It was just a doctor who has never treated a COVID patient saying 1 week masks don't work, and a month later, everybody putting them on and not citing one study to justify that change. It was government by diktat. And so during that first year, we literally got rid of every amendment to the Constitution except the Second Amendment. It's the only one that's left. And, what I tell people is, we have to love our freedom more than we fear a germ. We have to. And, and I would even, remind people that even if this was the deadly disease that they say it is, there's worse things than death. And there was a whole generation, and that may sound cold, and people get mad at me for saying it, but we're lucky that there was a whole generation of Americans in 1776 who said it would be better to die than to not have these rights written down. And they gave us that. They gave us that gift of that Bill of Rights. And in 1 year, at the bidding of a doctor, because he's telling us, you need to do this to save them, and orchestrated fear and, all of the weird stuff they did with the numbers, which is not what public health is supposed to be doing. In 1 year, all of those rights have been taken away from us. And, you know, we Democrats and Republicans need to stop fighting each other. And we need to start fighting the bad guys, the people who are taking away everything we value, everything. There's no such thing as Republican children, Democratic children. You know, and our kids deserve to have the same Bill of Rights that our parents gave us. And people need, whatever their fears are, they need to put those aside and, you know, and demand that we get those things back.
I think it's a really moving summation. It's not just, and we could go on forever, but just sum it up for us. This is not just a domestic phenomenon, the old system being swept away because of COVID. I mean, this is, you describe it in the book as the end of liberal democracy globally.
Right, and that, I think I do a job in that book that nobody's ever done before. And I think it will become clear to people when they read the last chapter of this book how this happened, how all of these liberal democracies across the globe pivoted simultaneously to obliterate constitutional, to have, as I said, a coup d'etat against democracy globally, and to impose totalitarian.
I'm going to bring it back. I just want to show you something. Let me get the YouTube back up too. If you are in the bigot arena, I put a link to his book. I would like you to buy it from A&C Report because it's Amazon affiliates. Knock on wood before we get kicked out of there too. But the top book here, The Real Dr. Fauci, that's what you can get. And there's some books under it that I've written, that my brother's written, or that other based people have written on the Civil War, World War II, and so on. And you might want to look at some of those and get one of those. But definitely get RFK's book. We're trying to make it, you know, stay as the best seller. And is on the top of that link that I just dropped in to the sidebar if you're watching on YouTube. And I will put it in the description when this goes on PeerTube, VK, and so on. Okay, now I'm going back to the stream. Oh wait, we had a couple Shekelchats. DJ Cock, no wait, Centrality. Nope, first Deluxe. Wow, 25. You the man. Keep fighting the good fight, they say. Oh, I'm gonna be. Centrality says, I'm working on a project on freedom and libertarianism. I'd like to get your advice on some things. I'll pay you for it. Well, hell yeah. That's the magic word. I'd do it anyway. DJ Cogdill says, so when people talk about Bill Gates killing African children with vaccines, they're right. I always thought this was a QAnon level bullshit. It is QAnon level bullshit. It depends on, like, what you mean by it. You need to listen to the video with David Crown and myself about HIV and AIDS. The criteria for what counts as AIDS, for example, in one area is not the same in another area. Well, that doesn't sound very scientific. Science is supposed to have objective standards. I mean, uniform standards at least, where it is what it is. Did you do an antibody test? If that's the standard, you know, threshold in the United States, and when yet that's different for Canada and that's different for Ghana or Nigeria, why? Because it's too expensive. So you know what the test for AIDS is in a lot of West Africa? It's just based on whether or not you have 3 symptoms like a fever, diarrhea, and persistent rash, which could be malaria, malnutrition, like 50 other things. And they go, oh my God, look at the AIDS pandemic in Africa. Everybody's got AIDS. Everyone doesn't have AIDS. Everyone's failing the AIDS test because they made the threshold so low that just about anything counts as AIDS, even though it's probably not AIDS. Well, but now we need the AIDS medication, right? We need this ATZ and destroy your red blood cells, and guess who's behind that? Dr. Fauci, Matilda Krim. Where's the bell? Right, the same old goobers going back to Tel Aviv. And that's just one example. And that's across the board. A lot of different diseases, illnesses, and so on have different thresholds in different areas. So you're like, oh, look at the disproportionate number of such and such category that has this illness. Well, you might want to check. Because although people are different biologically, and that's perfectly reasonable, we go, oh, well, more of them have this because they're different biologically. Yeah, maybe. Or, more simply, and obviously, because you can check it, they have different thresholds in different geographic regions as what counts as what. Which is ridiculous. If you're going to say someone has a disease like that, you have to have a fucking test. You can't just be some vague symptoms and say, oh yeah, that's it. But that's exactly what they do. And they do that because they get the statistics they want. They're like gerrymandering the stats so that they can push and force the drugs on these people. And you could say maybe they're being racist. I don't think it's race. I think it's just whoever's poor enough to take advantage of, they'll do it. They did in Latin America, they did in Africa, they do it in Southeast Asia. They don't do it in East Asia because they have too much money, right? They can't do it in East Asia. Japan has the fewest number of vaccines and the lowest infant mortality rate. In fact, they don't have ADHD. Just, it doesn't exist in the whole country. Why is that? I don't know. Is that pricking their kids with weird shit? Chip Wallace says, thanks. Hooker says, hope all is well. Hey, thanks, Hooker. 30 from the People's Republic of Australia. I hope you're doing well down there. Down meaning south of here. Australia's a sad fucking case, man. But they all rolled this out. They planned this crap a couple decades ago. I've already got this book. Man, okay, let's go back to the interview. It's so based, and it can't stay on YouTube, and we all know why. And you know why you get kicked off Instagram. Same reason I get kicked off Instagram, and Facebook, and Twitter, and Vimeo, and YouTube multiple times, and PayPal, and Patreon, and MySpace, and AOL, and Stream Elements, and Streamlabs for money, and Pornhub. I even got kicked off Pornhub. And Rumble, but I got it back. And Parler. I don't even remember all the other crap. Daily Motion, Live Leak. I got kicked off Live Leak for a Palestine video. What else? Aqueduct. Gumroad. That didn't even last 24 hours. Anyway. Centrality says, I'd rather pay you. How should I contact you? On Telegram? You can contact Varg on Telegram and he'll get hold of me. Or you can add my Skype. RYS, the number 2. Sense as in common sense. SENSE. Just contact Varg. He'll get hold of me and then we'll talk on Skype. Alright, now back to that base of base interview. Ding.
Controls like nobody's ever experienced. People would sit around and say, how do they all know what to do at the exact same time? And I show that in this book exactly. They have been planning it for 20 years, and this is going to sound like paranoid and a conspiracy theory, but you know because you've read it that I document exactly what happened, names, dates, and the involvement, the really deep involvement of the intelligence agencies, of people from the bioweapons divisions of our militaries across the globe, who are more aligned with China, the bioweapons developers in China and the United States were more aligned and loyal to each other than they were to the nations that they're supposed to be defending. It's a very odd phenomenon, but I show how it happened meticulously, and I would urge people just, if you read nothing else, read the last chapter of that book. It's called Germ Games, and you will understand how your government turned against you.
Yeah, I read it last night and stayed up till 2 in the morning. It upset me. I got to ask one last question that's not germane to any of this, but I just can't control myself because it's a subject of interest to me. So, the Warren Commission, which was the commission that investigated the murder of your uncle in 1963 in Dallas, produced massive volume of paper. Nearly 60 years later, some of it is still classified. We just learned that it will not be. It was supposed to be released years ago. It still hasn't been released. given that virtually everyone directly involved is dead, why do you think those materials are still classified?
It is a mystery. I mean, clearly, as you and I talked about, it's not about it. It can't be that they're protecting an individual. They have to be protecting institutions.
That's why.
It's weird because, you know, I didn't agree with Trump on a lot of stuff, but Trump was willing, one of the things about him is he was willing to defy institutions and break things.
Yeah.
And he did not like the CIA. He promised he was going to release it.
I know.
And then he didn't. And, you know, I'd like, if I ever run into him again, I'm going to ask him, you know, why, what made you change? What did they tell you? What did they tell you that made you change your mind? And of course, you know, I have no idea what Biden's.
They told him it was Israel involvement, and Trump said, oh, and backed off. That's what happened.
Thinking on this, but they all promise they're going to release it, and then they all stop. And it's, you know, our country really took a turn at that point in history, and it's really important for Americans to really understand what happened. And, you know, the Warren Commission was a whitewash. I don't think any Americans, there's almost no Americans other than highly placed people in the New York Times who believe the Warren Commission, you know, and so I hope at some point, you know, we do find out something about the truth.
You think we will?
I don't know. I've given up making predictions, Tucker.
I just want to say it again. Of all the people who need to write a book like this, you're in last place. You had no reason to write this, but you did anyway. And I'm just really, really grateful for your bravery and the meticulousness of your research and your willingness to come on today. So thank you.
Thank you for your courage in having me on, because I haven't been on a TV show like this in 15 years. Thank you.
We didn't think twice. I was so impressed by it. Name of the book is The Real Anthony Fauci. Absolutely worth reading. Bobby Kennedy Jr., name of the guest. Tucker Carlson today, the name of the show. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
I really need to talk to him about the assassination of his father and his uncle. But I have no way of reaching him, and I have no way of being noticed because I'm kicked off the everything too. And I'm not going to get on Tucker Carlson, so sucks. But it was a mystery. We do have answers, but it's just like I was saying earlier about Rittenhouse or Jeffrey Epstein. The people that have these answers and did do the research aren't allowed to fucking talk. And I don't see that changing. They're all complaining about censorship and woke culture and stuff. I'm like, yep. Here, I was the first one deleted on YouTube. I got it December 2008. As soon as the ADL partnered with them, I was gone. Sure was high on that list. The reason that, and Rogan was close. He's like, oh, it's got to be the CIA. It can't be the mafia or this or this or that. For them to be protecting it, you know, this many years later, it's got to be government. I think you're close, but it ain't our government. It's the Israelis. And the thing is, I mean, look at it right now. How many times have they hit Syria with airstrikes? They're actively racially colonizing the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and it's not on a single news channel. And the Chinese realize this, and many others realize this. If you want to get away with a crime, just involve the Israelis, and the Americans will say nothing. Kennedy was inspecting Dimona, and Israel had stolen uranium, physically stole it from the United States, and they sold trade secrets to the Soviets, effectively creating the entire Cold War. And the best part about the Bay of Pigs, you know, they always like, oh, Kennedy didn't say any air support, and that's why the CIA was mad about the Bay of Pigs, so they shot him. No. Bowman, who's the guy in charge, and Kennedy did send air support. You know what wasn't there? The ground support. You know why the ground support wasn't there? Because they didn't have any fucking guns. You want to know why they didn't? The anti-Castro Cuban faction inside that was supposed to rise up and get Castro, those weapons had been diverted to Israel. So there was nothing there. And the whole thing failed. and could have started a nuclear war. Every fucking time. After New Mech is released in March, I will do the fucking Kennedy film. I'm sick of it. Killdozer just says ding. Yeah, exactly. So I just let a little bit of info slip right there, and I usually keep to the chest, but fuck it. I'm inspired by RFK Jr. I need to talk to him about his father and his uncle. Or Mel Gibson. William Wallace says, I already pre-ordered his book a couple months back, so I can't use your affiliate link. Here's a few shekels to make up for it. How base would it be if he calmly looked at Tucker and said it was them? Well, he's close. It's like, look, they're thinking, oh, what, are people still alive that were involved? No, look, they can never release the case because it was our greatest ally that killed both Kennedys. And that is an untouchable subject. Johnson did not reverse any policies other than on the Middle East. He stayed in Vietnam as Kennedy had done, and anyone that thinks he was about to leave Vietnam is full of shit. Him and McNamara went around and got $6 billion accumulated for it and jobs in all these different countries for the new fighter jets toy they were going to use. Kennedy was not an angel. He had some stupid policies too. But he was turning on the CIA. Because the CIA and the Israelis were diverting weapons that were meant for anti-Castro Cubans and sending them to Israel. They'd been doing that. They've been doing that gun-running trick with Batista. They did it with Somoza. The whole Iran-Contra affair, I'll give you some more info. It should be called Israeli-Contra. Because the Israelis had been arming the Contras long before the Americans got involved. Part of one of the false flags, and I'm using the original definition of that, of getting weapons diverted to Israel was through Nicaragua. They were purchasing surplus World War II weapons for themselves and then selling it to Israeli businessmen so that they could fight Palestinians. And that is the father of the Contras. And they're working with Sammy K. out of Miami, Jewish mob boss, who's affiliated with, should I stop? Well, Sun Morn and then the Mega Group, and then you get Epstein, second generation. The whole thing's a big circle. DJ Cogdale says, are there any books on Israel giving the Soviets the nuclear bomb? They didn't give them the nuclear bomb. Soviets built their own nuclear bomb. They gave them trade secrets so they could miniaturize it and launch it on ICBMs and things like that, which they stole from the Americans. Willie Wallace, and yes, there's books on it. I'm not your personal Google. Oh, I got Williams. Killdozer got it. All right, I'm going to go over to Telegram. Fuck it, man. I kind of want to talk about Kennedy. I'm in a mood. Someone just said Thane Eugene Caesar. Yeah, that's who shot RFK. You know what's sad is RFK Jr. was going to meet him last year because Thane fled to the Philippines and Thane died, so he never got to talk to him. But he shot his father in the head. He's working for John Alessio, who was a front man for... I get sick of it re-explaining this shit. And, you know, if it wasn't for Alex Jones and all the kooks and stuff, and be like, oh, Executive Order 1110, oh, fuck you with that. The truth would have come out immediately as soon as there was an internet. But it's these professional charlatans, and they did the same thing with September 11th. They just go off way out into Kookville and create a cult. Turn the whole thing into a tar baby and, you know, polka dot dress and all this crap. And you don't feel like dealing with the flack from the herd of airplane deniers and, you know, all this shit. And you just toss your hands up after a while. More Kennedy talk, says Centrality. I'm gonna do it on Telegram. Join the Telegram. 3 shots. Kyle's gonna get acquitted, by the way. Oh, Rye Jack time. No, I'm not gonna be drinking Jack because as soon as that baby takes a nap, it's bound time. So maybe I'll be on Telegram, maybe I won't. Depends on the status of the youngin'. Love my wife. She's so fucking beautiful. I just did all this calendar, these like professional models and stuff, and I was like, they got nothing on her. They know it. Ric Flair has a YouTube channel. I know. I follow Ric Flair. I got a Ric Flair robe right here. And that was not prompted. That was a random YouTube thing. Woo! I'm going to add that. I got the robe out because I had one of the calendar girls wearing Ric Flair robe. I don't think we ended up using it, but it was pretty fucking badass just to have myself. Yeah, I upset the incels and all the weirdos. Hey, Alex Jones is convicted for defamation on the Sandy Hook stuff. And good, because fuck him, because he did. And he's got plenty of money, and he ought to give a lot of it to the parents of the victims. Because he sat there for years acting like they're a bunch of crisis actors. What an asshole. And it's because it fit his worldview. Like, they're coming to get our guns. Like, they did not try, even attempt, to take or reduce your guns after that shooting. They would not stage an event and then not follow through with the gun grab. There was no gun grab. 6WL says, sorry off topic, but does Ted have more writings than the Systems Need a Strict and the Manifesto? For example, is the Truth About Primitive Life a critique of anarcho-primitivism his? No. Don't get that. That's just trash. A guy that interviewed him a bunch in jail who was just a leftoid fucking retard that doesn't get it. He thinks he's like he looked at Ted as like some psycho environmentalist that wants to get rid of technology and go back to nature. What manifesto did you read? That is just a trite understanding by someone that's like filling in the conclusion with something they anticipated he was going to say instead of what he's saying. Yes, there are other Ted writings. He's written some poetry, and you can write him. He's alive. He's in jail. Write him a letter. He'll send you all kinds of stuff. I have Uncle Ted file right here of letters and from jail and postcards and so on. He's a math whiz, so if you send him riddles, he likes that. He'll answer them. It's weird. I kind of have friends with this like serial killer. I don't like that part, but I like what he wrote before he lost it. And they tortured him, man. I mean, he was a victim of psych experiments, not MK Ultra, a different one. And you know, you reap what you sow, right? You fuck around with this child prodigy and push his buttons enough, and you know, he becomes a supervillain. The link to Telegram. Okay, yes, for newcomers. Let me grab that for you. Thank you for mentioning that. There are two. So here's how we roll. This is the Telegram for news from me. And this is the Telegram also news, but it's one that anyone can share their piece with. Everybody can talk. Add members. Let's see. Invite link. Okay, here is the invite link to that. And I'm actually going to post that in the other one too. So it'll be on both. One is a chat for everybody to talk to each other, but that gets overwhelming because it's just like ding, 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 people posting stuff. Just turn notifications off and visit it when you feel like, you know. But get in Telegram because I'm going to stream over there in a second. Because you can't say what you want on YouTube. I already have to delete this video. Oh, we're at 107 likes. I'm going to turn it to private. 108. Somebody just pop in 109, please. The Bigot Arena, well, I'm going to leave it open. Thank you, 6WL, Centrality, DJ Cogdill, who's regular. William Wallace, Killdozer 9000, who said power ding. Okay. Here's the power ding. Here's the regular ding. And Hooker, hope all is well. Chip Walker, thanks. And Deluxe 24/7. Jay Snyder. Jay, you should Skype me or get on Telegram. Poseidon, who's been based, gives some base donations now and then too. Ernie Truth, long timer. Team K 2020, who's the first time I think I've seen that person. Arin Gazimus, semi-regular, and Inner CIA, another semi-regular. You guys are why I continue doing this shit. 109 countries. 109. Peace. Acquit Rittenhouse.